So when it comes to the Scholar and Endwalker, I honestly think that people are sleeping on it. Or speaking for myself, from my personal raid experience, I know people are. Let's look at this orange circle placed on the ground and how the Scholar does the kind of comical Scholar shuffle out of it. Yeah, it's honestly not that impressive. I am with you on that. I needed, even in a past video, to put background audio of Eddie Hall behind it to enhance its entertainment value. You know, kind of like how the fish in the sea of clouds fly. I'm not going to forget that tooltip anytime soon. It's been years since I saw it, and it's still stuck in my mind. The Eddie Hall fart launch. But let's be serious, first impressions are very important, and when we're talking about the Endwalker trailer, this really is every job's first impression. I really do think that rather than a problem of strength of the skill, that is a problem of optics. The way I view the Scholar Shuffle is that it really has two uses that aren't super obvious from the footage shown. The first of all is dodging mechanics or fulfilling mechanics. People are going to say, oh, that orange circle. No, dodging that unimpressive orange telegraph is meh. I'm going to provide real in-game current raid tier examples of what I mean from E9, E10S, E11S, and E12S. I can honestly think of a good use for this ability in every single raid that we have right now in the current tier. Second of all is going to be maximizing melee uptime or helping casters adjust faster. There's no secret that there is an incredible bias in the higher end of raiding towards 2 melee in any raid composition. Pull up the top rankings on FF logs, it's very clear. But what this skill to me is that it is indirectly a very powerful DPS buff. Let's start off with the first point and take some examples of what I meant for that first point. That this Eddie Hall fart propulsion skill for Scholar is actually going to be huge in raiding. So E10S, the boss is called Shadowkeeper, has a mechanic where it spawns like orange and purple orbs, and your goal is as a party to split in separate groups and be stacked and share the orb damage as it comes in. Failure to do this will absolutely dunk your group and has wiped my group in Prague. I know for me, I choose to pop sprint and run like hell for it when this mechanic happens. And now this comes to a little bit of a side question, is like, do we retain sprint and Endwalker for combat like it is today? And honestly, I assume so because the developers didn't mention it. The developers have been incredibly transparent about things like belts, teleportation fees. I think that a big change like this would absolutely have been mentioned. But regardless, especially during Prague, you don't always know when you're going to use sprint or not, and most raiders are in progression raiding. Most raiders that I know will just clear a tier, they don't even really care to farm it, and even fewer care to parse optimize. This is really a truth about 14, is most raiding is going to be progression. People really just want to see the fights, get the reward of clearing the fights, the dopamine hit, and really just leave to like other games. I'm sure pretty much everyone watching this video knows at least 5 or more people that do that. The point of that is sprint isn't necessarily a guaranteed factor exactly when you want it to happen. During Prague, you might have someone be like, oh crap, I need to move to this other side of the field. I need to use sprint or I'm gonna wipe the entire party. And now all of a sudden you don't have it for these orange and purple crappy orbs. So would I take this Scholar skill here? Guaranteed I would. I absolutely would. And this example is going to be E11S, and maybe it's not the best example of like, oh, I need to do this, but electric cycles honestly does involve a lot of very specific movements, but more than that, it is just painful as crap, and the party spread making it a little bit trickier to AoE heal. But when I talk about like the movements here, it is sometimes very rough. Let's say that you're electric tether, so you need to position yourself in a V shape, like in front and between the two tanks, and then the tanks also need to position behind you, and the party is going to be behind the boss. But after this, or rather before that, you have like the spread and damage intervals. It is a very quick mechanic, and there's a lot of damage coming out. And would I like this speed boost? Absolutely. But one thing I should say about the skill is that I'm suspecting from the way that the developers introduced it that it's not just the speed, because they were saying like the speed was just a tacked on benefit. So it might be something to like the Sage's level 90 skill Numa, which is going to be healing, it's going to be 10% mitigation, and then it is also going to be a burst of damage. So it could also have a 10% mitigation component, making this even better here. If we're specifically talking about the speed boost, I do think that this would help smooth out the rough edges, especially on electric cycles. I know that the cycles mechanics could be very fast at times. Now in E9S, we have these brambles and a few different bramble strategies that we lay down the brambles in a very specific coordinated way, and then eventually later in the fight, we need to weave around all these different brambles as meteors come down. And this is a pretty tight timed mechanic as well, and it also has a damage component, so Yeah, Eddie Hall Propulsion really can come in handy to save the day here. If you say, like, progressing this fight, you're not gonna know, or probably won't off the bat know, I need to run here, or you might not have sprint, which I know my meter position as a ranged DPS was a lot further along and a lot more weaving, so I definitely would like it here too. Now we're talking about E12S, which has a few instances that I'd love it. So the first one is going to be Titan's Earth Propulsion Explosion Thingies phase. The second part of it, because there's going to be 3 of them, but the second one has 2 players at random marked with blue tethers, or blue markers rather, that they need to go exactly north or south, literally polar opposite ends. And I know that I personally do save sprint here every single time, because I've encountered in the past many times where I've done a snafu and I've been south and someone else is already south. We wiped the party. Painful, painful, painful mistake. And even though I do know the mechanic and have done it successfully many times in the past, it is just really fast. Or take lions, and the current strategy is to interleave the lion cleaves as north and south lions, have their like fire burps and fire poodles dropped in a specific alignment with the DPS, swapping spots from a safe spot. It's really pivotal to get there to the north and south lions in times, because how to say it, if you don't, you're gonna literally annihilate the party. It's gonna be a wipe. The point where I run from the north to the safe spot is gonna be like the first one. I wait for the cleaves, I bait, and then run to the far northeast side, and that's gonna be the 3rd lion breath that I'm gonna take. So it's gonna be the 1st and the 3rd lion breaths that I take as a ranged DPS. And then if I make a mistake, say I use sprint. Oh my god, this is actually a really good use case. Say I am tethered to a north or south lion. So I need to like be on the north or south side to make sure that the lion cleaves on the sides go right. If I'm on the south side, but I really need to be on the north side because my lion that I'm tethered to is the north one, not the south one. Let's just say I had a snafu, and yes, this did happen in Prague. I will need to use sprint to get there, or I risk wiping the party just there, then and there. So I could use sprint there, and then I save the party. Okay, but now after that safe spot, when I need to go to the east side of the north lion, all of a sudden I do not have sprint. Oh shit, this is when things and timings get tough, because there's also going to be a go outer intercard or out north south mechanic that's going to hurt a lot too. I think you can survive it with Echo, but actually no, I know you can survive with Echo because it got bumped once. But the point is, this is tight. Or even take something as quote-unquote trivial as the statues, which marks people with markers, and that 4th person with the marker needs to super quickly make it either to the southeast or the southwest side of the platform, or they're just going to get thrown off the entire platform. The inner statue is going to be far harder than the outer statue, and so they need to really boogie it. Or take during phase 2 with the stack mechanic for melee uptime. She knocks you back there, and then you need to sprint back to the boss to stack. That's going to be tons of damage and speed boost needed to adjust there. It's like, yeah, you could use sprint there, which is what we do, but it's just like, what if the Scholar did this? I'd like that. It's like, will we have the option to do mechanics without it? Obviously, but it can smooth out the edges. Which leads me to, I want to say one thing about perfection and rating. It's like, obviously we can do without the skill. Obviously, our developers are talented, and they would not be designing fights where you were getting punished just because you didn't take a Scholar. I don't see that at all. But on the flip side, we don't see many perfect raiders. We don't see people who are just like, I know every mechanic inside out and backwards. No, because most raiders are progressing. It's kind of like saying or asking the question, why isn't everyone's DPS at the same value as those doing a 99th percentile parse now? And that's because raiding is messy. Most raiders are doing prog, not everything is set in stone, and so the ability to take the edge off is so important. Now the second part is melee uptime. Current raid team compositions highly favor melee DPS. Sorry, I was thinking maybe I should just try and re-record it, but guys, it is so hard to look at the FF logs and be like, huh, I think it might favor melee DPS a little. The top 50 groups compositions are basically identical. But we also have it where the 2 tanks are melee, and this means that when mechanics force players to move around and adjust away from the boss, you have 4 melee players interrupted. As someone who has done a metric ton of ranged gameplay, it is a big responsibility of mine to take mechanics on myself and maximize melee uptime. That is my responsibility. And this is why you hear a lot of the times uptime strategies. It's speaking mostly about melee, mostly black mages, so I'm trying to, you know what I mean. This is where the skill really flips as being not just useful for prog rating, but for even optimization rating. When you are looking at the significance of a melee DPS getting a few more GCDs in, that adds up. And so even though this isn't like a chain stratagem, it's not like a card buff, it isn't directly saying I increase damage, there is an incredible likelihood that when used correctly, this is going to provide a ton of DPS. And so with all of this said, I'm left in an awkward position about how I feel about Scholar. I've gone through the Sage's toolkit, I've gone through the Scholar's toolkit, they both are basically the same toolkits with very minor changes to one another. Like if you play a Scholar right now, you will pick up the Sage's toolkit very quickly. But meanwhile, when I check around Twitter, and my god, I hate Twitter so freaking much, guys, but when we look around on various social medias, we are seeing the Scholar being squatted over and Eddie Hall dumped on with impunity. We're seeing memes just dunking on the Scholar everywhere. But if you look at the kit objectively, and rating, and even in rating communities, actually just talking to so many people who are like literally cleared all the ultimate raids, we're talking triple legend players here, you can talk to them, and there is a lot of talk that this might be a very key skill. In fact, a lot of people are saying this might actually make, this one skill might make it that the Scholar is completely preferred over the Sage, because for the most part, the Sage is doing the same thing as the Scholar for the large part. We went through the skill lists. It's just like the Sage will have a bit more edge in like healing, but there's nothing wrong with the Scholar by any means. I mean, there are a few little like bumps and bruises here, but for the large part, these are like the same kits. The Sage, I already can see the same problem as the Scholar is, oh my god, this will run out of gas when it comes to a pure HPS healing scenario. But that's what we've already seen on Scholar. We're also going to need to like get a hold of these values, and we won't even know this in the media tour. There's no way that we could know this in the media tour, but when the actual Endwalker is launched and when people are actually like doing the trials at the start, it's going to be incredibly elucidating to see exactly where Chain Stratagem does. What does Chain Stratagem do? How much melee uptime is it? What is the exact cooldown on this sprint ability? How long is its duration? We will need to know all this information. And I guess kind of like ultimately my parting thoughts are, I see both Sage and Scholar being incredibly powerful, and I do plan to play both. I do have my issues with the Scholar. I am not the biggest fan of Chain Stratagem as a gameplay style, but there is no denying it is strong. Like I'm pulling up the FFLog's numbers right now and I'm like, this isn't a bad ability. A lot of raiders are loving it in the high end. Anyhow, that's just my thoughts. And I mean, I am actually genuinely, and I mean it very genuinely, curious what everyone else's thoughts are on this, because it's just like, obviously the Scholar is getting dunked on, obviously we have sprint, obviously it's a shuffle, but I think that this is very powerful, and I'm already hearing whispers and murmurs that like this might make Scholar like the go-to for like world first. Obviously we don't know final numbers yet, so let's calm down, but the talk is happening.